Time has always been my closest companion in the operating room. As a cardiac surgeon, I live between heartbeats, in the precious moments where life and death dance around my scalpel. But I never imagined I could actually step into those moments until that Tuesday morning changed everything. The day started like any other at Boston General. Rain pelted against the windows of Operating Room 4 as my team and I prepared for what should have been a straightforward valve replacement. Mr. Rodriguez, 57, lay on the table, his chest rising and falling with mechanical precision as the ventilator did its work. "Blood pressure is stable, Dr. Chen," Jessica, my favorite scrub nurse, announced. Her voice carried the same steady confidence I'd relied on for the past 5 years. "All preliminary readings are good." I nodded, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle over me. "Let's begin." The first incision was clean, precise, just as I'd done countless times before. The surgical field came into perfect view, and I could already see the calcified edges of the diseased valve. Everything was textbook until I made the second cut. That's when it happened. The steady beep of the heart monitor stretched into infinity, like someone had pressed pause on the universe. The droplets of condensation on the inside of my surgical mask hung suspended in air. Jessica's hand, reaching for an instrument, froze mid-motion. Even the blood in the surgical field stopped flowing, creating an impossibly still pond of crimson. I blinked, certain I was experiencing some sort of cognitive event, a stroke perhaps, or a sudden onset of temporal lobe epilepsy. But my own movements remained fluid, normal. I could think. I could move. I could even pull my hands back from the surgical field, watching as the air seemed to thicken around them like invisible molasses. "Hello?" My voice sounded strange in the absolute silence, absorbed immediately by the still air. No one responded. No one could. Fear gripped me, but something else rose alongside it, a peculiar sense of clarity. In this frozen moment, I could see everything with perfect precision. The slightly torn edge of the arterial wall I might have missed in real time. The beginning of a clot formation that hadn't been visible on the pre-op scans. Acting on instinct, I reached for my instruments. They moved normally in my hands, as if they were extensions of whatever phenomenon had gripped me. I worked with methodical precision, repairing the tear, removing the clot, all while the rest of the world remained in perfect stasis. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything snapped back into motion. "Suction ready," Jessica continued, completing her sentence from what seemed like an eternity ago, but couldn't have been more than a few seconds. I stood there, momentarily stunned, my hands already having completed work that, to everyone else, hadn't even begun. The repairs I'd made were there, real, not a hallucination. I'd somehow operated in a pocket of frozen time. Dr. Chen? Jessica's voice carried a note of concern. Everything okay? I swallowed hard. Yes. Yes, everything's fine. I continued with the valve replacement, my mind racing faster than my hands. But as I worked, something nagged at the edge of my consciousness. In those frozen seconds, just before time had resumed, I could have sworn I saw something, a shadow, a movement, a presence at the periphery of my vision. Something or someone else had been there with me. The surgery concluded without further incident. Mr. Rodriguez's new valve functioned perfectly, including the repairs nobody else knew I'd made. As I stripped off my surgical gown in the prep room, my hands trembled slightly. I caught my reflection in the glass window. Same dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, same focused brown eyes, same face I'd seen every day of my 43 years. But something had fundamentally changed. Later that night, alone in my apartment overlooking the city, I sat with a glass of wine gone warm and untouched. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflective, fragmenting the city lights into thousands of tiny stars. I thought about time, about the human heart, about the thousands of surgeries I'd performed. And I thought about those frozen seconds, about what they meant, about what I could do with them. Most of all, I thought about that shadow I'd seen. Because if I wasn't alone in those frozen moments, everything I thought I knew about reality was about to change. My next surgery was 2 days later, and I spent every minute until then questioning my sanity. I ran through all the possible medical explanations: temporal lobe anomalies, stress-induced hallucinations, microsleeps. None fit what I had experienced. The patient was Emily Watson, 16, with a congenital heart defect that should have killed her years ago. Her parents had been to every major cardiac center in the country, collecting a stack of refusals. Too risky, they all said. Inoperable. But I had to try. And now perhaps I had a way. Her pressure's dropping, Dr. Park, my resident, announced as we began. I could hear the tension in his voice. Emily's heart was barely holding together, each beat a small miracle. I made the initial incision and waited. Nothing happened. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. Time flowed normally, cruelly forward. Emily's heart continued its desperate flutter beneath my hands. "Come on," I whispered, too softly for anyone to hear. "Please." The second incision. Still nothing. It wasn't until I actually touched her heart that it happened. The world froze mid-beat, and I found myself again in that strange silent space between moments. The relief was so intense, I almost cried. That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. Not just a shadow this time, but a figure standing on the other side of the operating table. Tall, male, dressed in surgical scrubs like mine. Before I could speak or move toward him, he stepped backward into the darkness beyond the surgical lights and vanished. I forced myself to focus on Emily. Her case was even more complex than the scans had suggested. The structural defects were like a maze of wrong turns and dead ends. In normal time, it would have been impossible to navigate safely. But here, in this frozen pocket of eternity, I could see every detail, consider every possibility. I worked with careful precision, reconstructing her heart piece by piece. There was no fatigue in this timeless space, no trembling hands, no second guessing. Just clarity and purpose. When time resumed, 7 seconds had passed. 7 seconds in which I'd performed nearly an hour's worth of delicate repair work. Dr. Park's eyes widened behind his surgical mask. Dr. Chen. This isn't. The anatomy isn't what we expected. No, I said calmly, continuing the procedure. But we can fix it. The surgery was a success. Technically impossible, but undeniably successful. Emily would live, her heart now whole and strong. But as the team congratulated each other and began cleaning up, I stood at the scrub sink, my mind on the figure I'd seen. I waited until everyone had left before speaking into the empty room. I know you're there. Nothing. I saw you. You're like me, aren't you? You can step into the space between seconds. The silence felt different this time, charged with possibility. I turned slowly, and there he was, standing in the doorway. Silver hair, kind eyes, surgical mask pulled down to reveal a gentle smile. "Hello, Sarah," he said. "I've been waiting a long time for someone else to learn how to walk between the beats." "Who are you?" "My name is Marcus Fletcher. 20 years ago, I was chief of cardiac surgery at Mass General." His smile faded slightly. "Until I disappeared." "Disappeared?" He nodded. "There's so much I need to tell you, Sarah. About what we can do. About what it costs." He glanced at his watch, an old-fashioned analog timepiece that seemed somehow significant. "But not here. Not now." "When?" "Tomorrow. Midnight. The hospital chapel." He turned to leave, then paused. "And Sarah? Be careful with those 7 seconds. They take more from us than you know." Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving me with more questions than answers, and a growing sense that my gift might also be a curse. I spent the next day in a haze, my mind replaying Marcus's words. Every heartbeat seemed to echo with possibility and warning. By evening, exhaustion had settled deep in my bones, a new feeling that no amount of coffee could touch. The hospital chapel was empty when I arrived, 5 minutes before midnight. Moonlight filtered through the stained glass, painting the floor in fragments of color. I'd never been religious, but there was something comforting about this space, as if it existed slightly outside the normal flow of time, even without my interference. "The first time it happened to me was in 1998, Marcus's voice came from behind me. A 6-year-old boy with an aortic dissection. Impossible case. Everyone knew it. Then time just stopped. I turned to face him. In the chapel's dim light, he looked more substantial than he had in the operating room. More human. How does it work? He sat in one of the pews, patting the space beside him. Honestly, I still don't know. But I have theories. The human heart creates an electromagnetic field that extends beyond our bodies. When we operate, we enter that field. Some of us, Very few of us can use that field to step outside of time. How many others are there? Were, he corrected gently. I've known of 3 others over the years. All gone now. The weight of that statement hung in the air between us. What happened to them? Marcus pulled out his watch again, holding it up in the moonlight. Notice anything unusual? I looked closer. The second hand wasn't moving in steady ticks, but in tiny, irregular jumps. It's broken. No. It's counting down. He handed it to me. Every time we step into those frozen seconds, we burn up a little bit of our own time. Those 7 seconds, they come from the end of our lives. The watch felt heavy in my hand. That's impossible, says the woman who performs impossible surgeries by stopping time. His smile was sad. We're not breaking the laws of physics, Sarah. We're trading our time for someone else's. A fair exchange, some might say. The others, they used up all their time? He nodded. Dr. Helen Martinez was the first I knew of. Brilliant surgeon. Saved hundreds of lives. Aged 30 years in the span of 3 months. They called it a mysterious rapid aging syndrome. Then there was James Chen, no relation to you. He burned through his time in just 6 weeks. And Patricia Walsh. How long have you been doing this? 25 years. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing an arm that looked decades older than his face. I'm careful now. Very careful. But in the beginning, he shook his head. The power to save a life, it's addictive. You start thinking, what's a few years off my life if I can save a child? What's a decade if I can prevent 100 deaths? I thought of Emily Watson, of the impossible surgery I'd performed. How much time did that cost me? There's no exact formula. But for complex procedures like that, maybe a month or 2. My hands began to tremble. I have 3 surgeries scheduled tomorrow. Cancel them. His voice was firm. Take a week off. Learn to be selective. This gift, it should be for the truly impossible cases, not every patient who comes through your door. But if I can help them, you can't help anyone if you're dead. He reached over and took his watch back. And there's something else you need to know. Something worse than the time loss. Before he could continue, both our phones buzzed simultaneously. Emergency surgery notification. My heart sank as I read the details. A pregnant woman, 28 weeks, massive cardiac trauma from a car accident. Marcus read the message over my shoulder. Sometimes the universe doesn't give us the luxury of choice. He stood up. I'll walk with you to the operating room. You're not coming in? I can't. Two time walkers in the same frozen moment. He shuddered. The consequences would be unpredictable. But Sarah? He caught my arm as I turned to leave. Remember, 7 seconds. No matter how tempting it is, no matter how much you think you need, don't try to take more. That's what happened to Patricia. Time snapped back, like a rubber band breaking. I wanted to ask what he meant, but my phone buzzed again. The patient was crashing. Go, Marcus said. Save them both. But remember what I said, 7 seconds is all we get. Any more than that, and time itself fights back. I ran for the operating room, his words echoing in my mind, wondering if tonight I would have to choose between saving my patients and saving myself. The operating room was chaos when I arrived. 2 lives hanging by a thread, mother and child, surrounded by a team trying desperately to save both. Sarah Martinez, 25 years old, 32 weeks pregnant, with a steering wheel-induced cardiac contusion that was causing her heart to fail. Blood pressure is dropping fast, Dr. Park announced. We're losing her. Babies in distress, the obstetrics resident added. We need to decide now, mother or child. I looked at the monitors, at the falling numbers that represented 2 lives slipping away. The old me would have had to choose. The new me. Maybe I didn't have to. Prepare for emergency C-section, I ordered. But give me 5 minutes with her heart first. The neonatal team hovered near the secondary surgical field they'd prepared. 1 life or 2 lives. It all came down to the next few moments. And how much of my own time I was willing to spend. The first incision, and nothing happened. The second, still nothing. My hands found her heart, and the world stuttered but didn't freeze. Fear gripped me. Why wasn't it working? "Come on," I whispered. "Please." On the fourth try, time finally stopped. The familiar silence descended, but something felt different. The air seemed thicker, more resistant. Moving my hands through it felt like swimming through honey. I pushed the thought aside and focused on Sarah's heart. The damage was extensive: ruptured cardiac tissue, severe contusions, failing valves. Even in frozen time, repairs this complex would take more than 7 seconds. Marcus's warning echoed in my mind. 7 seconds is all we get. Any more than that, and time itself fights back. But looking at Sarah's face, frozen in a mask of pain, thinking of the child within her, I made my choice. I would take as much time as they needed. The repairs were intricate, demanding. I lost track of how long I worked in that frozen space. 10 seconds. 20. Each movement became harder, as if the air itself was protesting my presence. The surgical lights began to flicker, casting strange shadows. That's when I heard it, a sound that shouldn't exist in frozen time. A crackling, like ice forming on a lake. It started at the edges of my vision and began creeping inward. The air itself seemed to be crystallizing. "No," I whispered. "Not yet. I'm almost done." The crackling grew louder. The instruments began to feel hot in my hands. My vision blurred, and I felt something warm trickle from my nose, blood freezing instantly as it fell. Just a few more sutures. Just a few more seconds. The shadows in the room began to move, coalescing into shapes that hurt my eyes to look at. I heard whispers in languages that had never existed, saw movements that shouldn't be possible in three-dimensional space. "Almost there," I gasped, though my voice made no sound in the crystallizing air. The final suture, the last repair. Just as my vision began to go dark, I felt time snap back like a rubber band. "Pressure stabilizing," Dr. Park was saying. Then stopped abruptly. "Dr. Chen, your nose." I wiped the blood away with my sleeve. "I'm fine. Begin the C-section now." The next few minutes passed in a blur. A baby's cry pierced the air, strong, healthy, alive. Sarah's heart held steady, accepting the repairs I'd made in that impossible stretch of frozen time. 2 lives saved. But at what cost? As the team closed, I caught my reflection in a darkened monitor. My hair, which had been its usual black at the start of surgery, now had strands of silver at the temples. My hands, when I held them up to the light, showed new lines, slight age spots that hadn't been there before. I stumbled to the scrub room, barely making it to the sink before my legs gave out. Marcus was there, catching me before I hit the floor. "How many seconds?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "I don't know." "Too many, but I saved them both." He helped me to a chair, his expression grave. "Look at your hands, Sarah. Really look at them." I held them up in the harsh fluorescent light. The changes were subtle, but undeniable. My hands looked 5 years older than they had an hour ago. "Time doesn't like to be cheated," Marcus said softly, "and it always collects its debt." The next week passed in a blur of tests and trembling hands. I canceled all my surgeries, claiming a family emergency. In reality, I spent hours studying my reflection, cataloging every new line, every silver hair. The changes weren't dramatic, but they were undeniable. I had aged years in moments. Marcus found me in the hospital library late one night, surrounded by research papers on temporal physics and cardiac electromagnetics. He placed a cup of coffee beside me. The real stuff, not the hospital's usual brown water. "You won't find answers there," he said, pulling up a chair. "Trust me, I've looked." I pushed aside a stack of papers. "Tell me about Patricia Walsh. You never finished the story in the chapel." He was quiet for a long moment, turning his watch over in his hands. Patricia was brilliant, a pediatric cardiac surgeon in Chicago. When she discovered her ability, she tried to save every child who came through her door. Not just the impossible cases, all of them. What happened? She pushed too far, tried to hold time still for too long. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. Time broke around her. When they found her in the OR, she was both 20 years old and 80. Both alive and dead, both there and not there. The laws of physics couldn't reconcile what she'd done, so they simply shattered. A chill ran down my spine. Is that what's happening to me? No, not yet. But Sarah. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. You need to understand something. There's a reason it's 7 seconds, 7 heartbeats. It's not random. It's a pattern woven into the fabric of reality itself. When we break that pattern, he shuddered, but the mother and baby survived. Doesn't that count for something? Of course it does, but at what cost? He rolled up his sleeve again, revealing his aged arm. Look closer. I did. Beyond the obvious aging, there was something else, something wrong. The skin seemed to shift and move like it couldn't quite decide what age it should be. In some lights, it looked 30 years old. In others, 90. Time isn't just about aging, Marcus continued. It's about causality, about things happening in the right order. When we stay too long in those frozen moments, we don't just age. We begin to come unstuck from time itself. As if to emphasize his point, the coffee cup beside me suddenly wasn't there. Then it was there, but empty. Then full again. I blinked and it stabilized. "You're seeing it now, aren't you?" Marcus asked. "The fluctuations. They'll get worse. Reality doesn't like paradoxes, Sarah. It fights against them." "How long?" My voice cracked. "How long before I end up like Patricia?" "I don't know, but there's something else you need to see." He stood up. "Come with me." He led me to a part of the hospital I'd never visited, a secure ward in the basement. Using an ID card that seemed to flicker between existing and not existing, he opened a heavy door. The room beyond was dimly lit, containing a single bed. In it lay a woman who appeared to be both young and ancient, her form shifting and blurring like a badly tuned television signal. "Patricia," Marcus said softly. I stepped closer, horrified and fascinated. Sometimes she looked like a young doctor, fresh out of residency. Other times she was elderly, withered. Occasionally she wasn't there at all, just an outline in the air. "She's been like this for 15 years, Marcus explained. Unable to die, unable to truly live, trapped between moments. Why are you showing me this? Because tomorrow morning you have a choice to make." He handed me a medical file. "James Chen's daughter is being transferred here, 6 years old, complex cardiac tumor, officially labeled inoperable." I looked at the scans, my heart sinking. It was bad, really bad. The kind of case that would require far more than 7 seconds to fix. "So now you know," Marcus said, "the full price of our gift. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge?" I spent the night at the hospital studying Chen's daughter's scans until my eyes burned. Maya Chen, 6 years old, with a heart that should have given out months ago. The tumor had wrapped itself around her aorta like a malevolent vine, making conventional surgery impossible. Each beat of her heart was a small miracle and a countdown. Dawn found me in the chapel again, watching the sunrise paint new colors through the stained glass. Marcus sat beside me, his presence both comforting and haunting. "I kept track," he said quietly, "of every life I saved. 342, each one cost me something, but each one mattered." He held up his hand, watching it fade in and out of reality. The question isn't whether it was worth it. The question is, where do you draw the line? I thought of Maya, of her father, a surgeon who had discovered this gift and used it until it consumed him. "Did you know him well, James Chen?" "Well enough to watch him fade away, trying to save enough money, enough time, to give his daughter a chance." Marcus's voice was heavy with memory. He knew about the tumor growing in her heart, you see. Knew it would kill her eventually. Every surgery he performed, every second he stole from time, was meant to buy her a future. The weight of that knowledge settled over me like a shroud. And now here she is. Here she is, Marcus agreed. And here you are. Maya's surgery was scheduled for noon. As my team prepped the OR, I could feel time itself holding its breath. The scans showed exactly what we were facing. A surgery that would take hours in normal time, far more than 7 seconds. BP's stable, Jessica announced, though I don't know how. I looked at Maya's face, peaceful in artificial sleep. Then at my hands, which showed the weight of my previous violation of time's laws. The choice stretched before me like an abyss. That's when I felt it, a presence beside me. Not Marcus this time, but someone else. Looking up, I saw a man who flickered between existence and non-existence, his features a blend of youth and age. James Chen had come to watch his daughter's surgery. Our eyes met across the operating table, and in that moment, I understood. Time wasn't just a river flowing in one direction. It was an ocean of possibilities, of choices, of sacrifices made for love. I made the first incision, and the world froze. But this time, I wasn't alone. Marcus stood to my left, James to my right. Behind me, I felt Patricia's presence. And others, all the time walkers who had come before, drawn to this moment of choice. 7 seconds, Marcus reminded me. It's not enough, I whispered. No, James agreed, his voice echoing strangely in the frozen air. It never is, but perhaps. He held out his hand, and I understood. One surgeon couldn't hold time still long enough to save Maya, but we were not alone, together. Patricia's voice whispered, young and old at once. I felt their power flow through me. All the time walkers lending me their strength, sharing the burden of these stolen seconds. The air crystallized around us, but held stable. Reality trembled, but didn't break. 7 seconds passed. Then another 7. The tumor came away perfectly. Maya's heart beating stronger with each repair. When time finally resumed, the impossible surgery was complete. The cost was visible immediately. More silver threaded my hair, more lines marked my face. But I wasn't scattered across time like Patricia, nor fading like James. The burden had been shared, the price distributed among all of us who walked between moments. Hours later, I stood watching Maya wake up, her father's flickering form beside her bed. She couldn't see him, but somehow, I thought she knew he was there. Marcus found me in the observation room. You understand now, don't you? Why 7 seconds was never about time at all. I nodded, watching as Maya smiled at something only she could see. It's about connection, about sharing the burden, about understanding that even in the spaces between heartbeats, we're never truly alone. "So," he asked, "what will you do now?" I looked at my hands, aged but solid, real. "I'll do what we've always done, save the ones we can, accept the ones we can't, and remember that every second we're given is a gift, frozen or not." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the world in shades of gold. Time moved forward, as it always had, as it always would. But now I understood. The real miracle wasn't in stopping time, but in how we chose to spend it. In the end, that's what 7 seconds of forever really meant.